Alright, so I got in a couple of grooming shears the other day that were pretty heavily damaged. Both of them are curved, one's a thinner, one's a chunker, and both, I believe, have probably been dropped. So let's see what we can do with them, if anything. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to want to do, in particular with this thinner, is I'm going to want to deal with this spot right here. You can see that we definitely have pretty hefty amount of damage on the inside of that blade right there. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't work a little bit of that out. Then I'm going to sharpen that out before I even start building a new ride line on this. This shear has not been sharpened before. So the overall, the shear actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. You can also see, let me see if I can catch this. I'm having trouble catching it, but there is, there it is. Just barely you can see it. There's damage on this tooth that's been rammed into the straight edge shear. So we're gonna have to deal with that as well. I think that that'll be a little bit easier than dealing with this because this is a pretty deep nick, but let's see what we can do. All right, so first things first, what I'm gonna do is I'm not even gonna take the scissor apart just yet. I'm gonna go ahead and sharpen it, just because I wanna go ahead and get rid of that nick that's on it first. And the reason that I'm doing this is I want to see if I can get it to close without a problem. I will take the shear apart and start the normal sharpening process in just a moment. This is something that I do. If you're not comfortable doing this, then just by all means don't start this way. I just want to see what happens once I get rid of that nick that's on the shear. So I'm going to start by actually bringing up a new burr on the inside. I'm going to work on sharpening past where I know that problem is on the blade, which is over on this side of the blade. Let me move the camera so you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing. Alright, so again, what I'm working on doing is making sure I bring up a burr and then remove that nick. And I can still see that nick just barely in the blade. I'm going to bring the burr the rest of the way up on the blade, all the way up to the tip. And then we'll go ahead and stop and see what we have. Alright, so if we just look at the inside edge right here, we can see we've gotten past the nick. It's on the inside edge. We've also gotten past the majority of the ride line that's on the inside. So we're going to have to reestablish a ride line on this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush the burrs off. So I just want to pull these burrs back so that I can go ahead and see if I can close this. So that's going to get rid of most of the burrs that are on the blade. I'm just going to very gently see if I can close past where that ramming problem was. And there's still a problem with the actual tooth blade as well. Let's also see if we get rid of all of that nick, which we did right in that area there. Maybe just a tiny bit of one left there, but we're going to take care of that with work on the inside. So we need to deal with this blade as well. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my 320 grit CBN hand hone, and on the inside of this blade, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of work on that tooth blade that's damaged. So I'm just going to work back and forth and get past that bit of damage that's there. And now we're getting closer to being able to close. So now the shear will open and close again. So now I have to work on rebuilding all of the components, because you can see I've only done a portion of the ride line on the inside here, and then need to go ahead and rebuild the ride line on this blade. All right, to recreate the ride line, I'm going to go ahead and use my Easy Rider to do this. You can see that I have the scissor clamped on the handle. I'm going to go ahead and press down on this piece right here. I'm going to go ahead and loosen this, set this where it's actually flat, come back over here and tighten this, and that way I've got my scissor set to the flatness of the ride area up against the tool that I'm going to be using, which is the same CBN hand hone. So now I'm just going to come across the shear, lifting as I go, all the way up to the tip. Just a few strokes, and we'll go sideways as we go to create like that 45-degree cut over the edge. And I'm going to work particularly just a little bit of extra right in the area where the problem area was with that nick, and a complete stroke to the tip, and then we'll stop and see what we have. All right, so you can see I still have this in the actual mounting fixture. The nice thing about this is it's magnetized, so you can take it on and off. And if we take a look at our ride line that we have here, now we have a nice ride line, again, all the way up to the tip. And we're ready to work on the other blade as well. All right, so I did the same thing. See if I can get that in there where you can actually see it. There we go. I tried shooting this just a second ago, and I was having a really hard time getting the tip to show up because there's, you know, you can see between them, so I lose the focus. But you can see that we have a nice ride line now all the way up the blade, and we've taken care of like the little area right here where it was bumping. So we're going to go ahead and go through the sharpening process on the blade itself now. What I neglected to say was I went from the 320 grit to a 600 grit to a 1200 grit to a 2000 grit CBN hand hone on the inside of this before I started the sharpening process. And all I'm doing here is just kissing this to bring up a burr. This is a colored shear, so it's a semi-convex shear, so it's going to have a slight bevel to it. I'm going to go ahead and remove the burrs. With a brush. So I pull those burrs back. Then I'm going to go over to the polishing disc to remove any additional burrs and create my final edge. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and create my final edge. Alright, I have a nicely polished blade, so I'm ready to start working on putting these back together. So what you'll probably notice is when I was getting ready to do the polishing on this, I just went ahead and brushed the burrs off and then went directly to the polish. The reason I could do that in this particular case is because I had created a slightly wider ride line on the inside of the shear and still had plenty of ride line left. So what I wanted to do is just do a complete burr removal as much as I could. And then that way we'll remove any other burrs with the cut when we're done, if there's any residual left over. But the polish should have taken all of those burrs off. Let's set this back together. I'd already put this spring tension in. Start this up. Now let that close, and now we have a shear that opens and closes freely again. Let's make sure we don't have any residuals left on that tooth. It's actually going to grab. And then probably one of the things I'm going to do as well is I am going to ramp the back area of this as well, since this happened before. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab this waterstone here, and I'm going to go ahead and just remove any chance of this getting hit again. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to ramp this inside area of the teeth just to cut across. This is actually pretty common when they're made in the factories. This is very gentle what I'm doing. And what that does is it allows the shear blade to cross over the teeth without any concern of grab. And it doesn't affect the cut because this is a thinner all the cut happens at the bottom of the notches in this style of shear. All right, so we're gonna give it a quick test now on some rabbit fur. All right, so the main thing that I'm trying to test is, number one, I want to make sure that when I do a cut at the tip, it pulls out nice and clean, which it is. I also want to test that back area where I did that ride work. And I also want to test along the middle section of the blade as well and make sure there isn't any catch or pull all the way up to the tip. So you can see here that we actually have a nice cut. So this shear will be ready to go back to the customer. We'll see what we can do with the next one. All right, so next in line is this curved chunker. So, I don't know how easy this is to see, but right in the tooth where it's making contact, if we turn it, you can see there's damage right there on that tooth. So really the best way to deal with this one is going to be to sharpen the tooth blade and then just actually, there's some damage on this one. In a second, I'm going to run over to my other magnifier. I just want to take a look at this. This is really not that bad, but I'm still going to end up having to do about the same thing because you can see it's not quite as deep. It's all the way across. I'm going to go ahead and sharpen some of this off first, then I'm going to go ahead and reestablish a ride line. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring up a burr. Just a few passes, making sure I pay particular attention to the area where that nick was. I'm going to check it here in the magnifier. Pretty much all of that nick is gone, so we are ready to go ahead and start rebuilding the ride line on the inside of this because I've actually removed a decent portion of that ride line when I did this. So let's take a look. And you can see I still have a little bit of a ride line, but pretty much nothing at the tip. And we're going to have to go ahead and deal with that because we want to strengthen that ride line up so we can get rid of the burrs and then do some polishing. Okay, so on the inside work here, I did the same thing again on that Easy Rider. Reestablished a ride line on the shear. Now I'm going to go ahead and edge that ride line. All right, and again, it's the same process as what we did on the other shear. Just bringing up a very small burr. I'm actually increasing the angle on this one too, because this one was only about 35 degrees right from the factory. So I wanted to bring it up to at least 40. It's actually going to make the shear cut better. All right, I'm going to take a peek and see if I've gotten past any of the damage on the inside of the shear, which I have. You can see in the magnifier that I still have a nice ride line. I'm going to go ahead and deburr with my brush. That will pull the burrs back and off, so I can't feel the burr on the edge anymore. And now I'm going to go ahead and do my polish. That brush is just a brush that you can get on Amazon. It's about $67. It's a great little tool. Polishing in that throat, making sure I get all the way up to the tip. Coming off. Polish looks good. On to the next step. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is the tooth that actually has the damage on it. I'm going to go ahead and relieve the backside of that tooth just a little bit. I don't know how easy this is to see in the video, but each one of these teeth, if I can just catch it just right, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit and see if I can catch it. Each one of the ends of these teeth, you can see it a little bit more on this one, where there's a very slight V ramp on the back edge. But pretty much each one of these teeth, it's hard to catch. There you go, you can see a little bit of it right there on that one. These are very, very fine. I'm gonna have to create a slightly larger one on the tooth that's actually damaged, but we'll go ahead and do that with a pin cone. All right, so the damaged tooth is the 5th tooth back. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th tooth back. So it's gonna be this one right here. I'm gonna turn this over, and on the inside of that tooth, I'm gonna take my pin cone, and I'm just gonna create a slight ramp on the inside of that tooth. Now what I don't want to do is slip and come over the top if I can help it. But by creating that slight ramp right there, what I'm doing is I'm alleviating that catch from where it hit before. And now I can go ahead and do a sharpening process on this. All right, so I did take the time to reassemble the shear before I actually do the sharpening on this. Let me zoom this back out just a little bit here. And the reason that I did that is I actually want to cut the burrs off of this when I actually sharpen this. And I'm only going to sharpen it. This doesn't get polished. And then also I want to make sure that I can open and close the shear freely, which I can. I'm just assisting it just a little bit right now to make sure. I also did go in and I did recreate a new ride line on this as well with the Easy Rider before I went to the trouble of resharpening this as well. But that's all the same process as what I did with the other blade. It doesn't matter whether it's the straight blade or the tooth blade, is going to work the same on that tool. So we're going to start up the machine. We're going to bring up a burr on the teeth, match the angle. There we go. I'm going to work to bring up a burr. All right, and we have a burr on the blade, so we'll go ahead and cut that off. All right, so the shear is still in the open position. I wanted to flip the camera around so I could make sure that I could show this where I can see it while I'm doing it. But I want to make sure when I close the shear and cut the burr off that I'm actually easing the burrs off. So what I mean by that is I'm putting pressure and I'm separating the blades, but I'm not separating them so much where they won't touch. So what I'm doing is I'm just easing the burrs off. Those blades are still touching, and that burr is, you might be able to hear it. Those blades are touching. I just want to make sure they don't cut under the full force of the set on those initial cuts. And now we have a nice smooth action on the shear, well, you know, for a chunker. We'll go ahead and give this a quick test. All right, so first things first, I want to make sure that I have a good clean cut up at the tip. You want to make sure you don't have any grab. Got the skin there on that one. So good clean cut, doesn't have any grab in the tip. I want to make sure in the throat, because a lot of times on these curved shears, the throat area can be a problem as well, the early entry part of the shear of the cut. And that seems to be cutting well. I want to do an overall cut, make sure that we have a good clean cut. And again, these shears are back to their regular action and they're ready to go back to the customer. All right, so not everything that I did there was completely orthodox, right? I did do a little bit of finagling with the actual process because I wanted to make sure when I had the shear finished that I would get rid of all of those nicks that were in the blades, which we accomplished. That was the main thing that we were trying to do. And then the other is we didn't want them to ram again. So that's why I ramped the early entry of the throat on the thinner. It's why I sharpened past any damage before I created a new ride line. Remember, I didn't recreate a new ride line between the sharpening and the polishing, but the only reason that I did that was because I knew I had a well-established ride line. It is a curved shear. It's hard enough to put a ride line on curved shears to begin with. So if I'm putting a new ride line on curved shears, which you should always do when you're sharpening, I always try and make sure that I have a well-established ride line that's just a little bit thicker than I want it, so that when I sharpen down into it, I don't have to recreate another ride line unless I absolutely have to. just for the sake of ease, and I end up with the same result. So that is a little tip and a little trick, but just play with it at your leisure with some shears that you can practice on if that's something that you've never done before. You also saw that I cut the burrs off of the teeth on the chunker, and the reason that I do that is it tends to seat those in better on that straight blade than trying to remove the burrs and polish the burrs off. At least that's what I found. There's nothing wrong with polishing the burrs off. That is another method that some people use. This is just my method that has seemed to work well for me for 30 years or so. Well, not 30 years on curved chunkers because they haven't been around that long, but since they came out, that's one of the things that I implemented into my business. So, and then of course you got to see that the Easy Rider, which actually does make working ride lines on the curved shears a whole lot easier. And it's very simple. Any of these tools that I'm working with, whether it's the Flat Home, the Easy Rider, all of those things I actually sell. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can reach out to me below. And if you're interested in learning more about the sharpening business period as well, you can reach out to me. The best way to get me is my email, and it's otenews. Ote is for on the edge. That's the name of my business. And then news, so otenes @gmail.com is the best way to get me. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope that this helped. Again, don't take this as 100% Bible. We were not dealing with shears that were in the best shape. I know that they were brand new, but they were pretty heavily damaged. So this is actually trying to correct damage that happens out in the field and get them back to fully functional again. Anyway, hope this helps. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know.